Some pets become family, while others become nightmares. And in today's video, I'm looking at pets who turn on their own owners in the most horrifying ways. From a woman whose pet chimpanzee suddenly turned on her during her daughter's birthday party, to a man who walked out of his bathroom and found his escaped pet lion waiting in the hallway. But first, the story of Azura Magda and the wolves she trusted with her life. It was April 24th, 2017 in northern Idaho, and the property was quiet in a way that felt wrong by the time anyone thought to check on her. Azura Magda was 42 years old. She owned a small bakery in town that she had been running for several years and had spent the last several years rebuilding a life that a difficult divorce had pulled apart. Her marriage of 10 years had ended badly, and the aftermath was the kind of quiet that gets heavier the longer it sits. The empty house, the evenings with nothing in them, the feeling that a version of her life had simply disappeared. She stayed close to her daughter and kept herself busy, but the loneliness was real, and she carried it for a long time before she found something that helped. That something was the wolves. It started with one animal and grew from there. Over the years, she built a large enclosure on her property and eventually owned 9 of them. Caring for them became the structure her days were built around. She fed them every morning, cleaned the enclosure, photographed them constantly, and spent hours inside the space with them. I think about what it means to feel a loneliness that deep with 9 animals that can never be domesticated. I understand why she did it. I just wish someone closer to her had understood it too. Her daughter and her former husband had both expressed concern over the years as the animals grew larger and more confident. Visitors to the property sometimes became uncomfortable when several of the animals gathered near the fencing at once. Azura dismissed it every time. The wolf obeyed her commands and followed her around the property without aggression. She had years of ordinary days behind her, and she used them as her evidence. On the morning of April 24th, she was supposed to meet her daughter later that day. She never arrived. Nobody was immediately alarmed because Azura often lost track of time while looking around the property. As the hours passed and calls went unanswered, her former husband drove out to check on her. When he arrived, the wolves were visible, moving along the fencing in a way that did not look normal. Azura's vehicle was parked where it always was. Her phone was inside the house. She was not. Azura had entered the enclosure alone that morning, something she had done hundreds of times before. At some point, the dynamic inside the pack shifted. One wolf became agitated, and the arousal spread through the group, the way it does in pack predators when one member escalates. In the wild, wolves communicate across long distances and usually avoid humans. However, in confined spaces such as pens, backyards, or rooms, a wolf that feels threatened, stressed, or overly excited has no easy way to retreat, which can increase its stress levels and make aggressive behavior more likely. She attempted to calm them, but the behavior continued to intensify. The animal closest to her lunged and made contact with her upper body, pulling her off balance. Once she was on the ground, the pack closed in. She sustained severe bite wounds across her arms, shoulders, and neck, and could not get back to her feet before a second animal pulled her further into the enclosure by her leg. She did not get up again. Her former husband found her near the far end of the enclosure. The animals were still present. What he found made clear that she had been there for several hours. Emergency services were called immediately, but there was nothing to be done. Azura Magda was pronounced dead at the scene. 9 animals she fed every single morning for years. I keep sitting with the fact that none of that history mattered once the pack dynamic shifted against her. Authorities secured the animals and transported them to a specialist facility. The investigation confirmed she had entered the enclosure alone and that the attack had involved multiple animals acting together. Azura had given those animals years of her life, but got nothing in return. Azura's story was about loneliness finding the wrong outlet. The next one I'm about to talk about is something entirely different. A woman whose entire livelihood became tied to an animal that kept getting more dangerous the more famous it made her. It was September 14th, 2015 in Houston, Texas, and the property was quiet when emergency responders arrived. Estela Moro was 27 years old and lived on the edge of the city. She had started posting videos a few years earlier to almost no response. Hundreds of views on a good day. Nothing that suggested anything was coming. Then she bought a tiger cub and everything shifted. People could not get enough of it. The cub chased toys across her floors, climbed her furniture, and followed her from room to room like a dog that had not yet learned its size. Her audience grew fast and then faster. Sponsorship offers arrived. Ad revenue climbed every month. Within a year, filming was no longer something she did on the side. It was how she paid for everything. The math behind that decision haunts me. The animal that brought in the income was also the only thing that could end everything. The tiger was not just a pet. It was the reason the light stayed on. Estella's tiger kept growing, and the dynamic between them shifted with it. Feeding time became something she approached more carefully as the months passed. When raw meat was present, the animal became intensely focused in a way that made her cautious. It would position itself between her and the food and hold that position until it finished eating. There were low warning sounds on certain days. A swat here and there that left bruises she did not film. She laughed most of it off publicly, and her audience laughed with her. Then her dog died while she was out one afternoon. She never told her audience what she believed had happened. She simply said the dog had died unexpectedly and moved on. But when she came home and found it, she could not think of another explanation. For a while, she considered giving the tiger away. Then she looked at her numbers, her sponsorships, her monthly revenue, and she kept filming. She had a moment right there where she could have walked away. The numbers won that argument. I think about how many of these stories come down to exactly that calculation. Years passed that way. One afternoon, she decided to film something that reminded people of the early days. The videos where she was right beside the animal, close enough to touch it, showing everyone how much it trusted her. Those videos always performed well, and she knew it. The camera was already recording when she stepped into the tiger's enclosure on her property. At first, everything appeared normal. The tiger approached the way it usually did, and Estella moved toward it and reached out. Then the animal's behavior changed in an instant. A tiger raised by a human from birth still carries the full behavioral and physiological profile of a wild apex predator. The animal struck her with its front paws and brought her to the ground. The force of the initial impact alone was enough to cause serious injury. What followed lasted only moments, but the damage was catastrophic. The tiger's jaws closed around the back of her neck and upper shoulder region with a bite force and caused immediate and severe trauma to the structures of her neck and upper spine. Estella lost consciousness within seconds and did not recover. The camera recorded for a short time before the footage ended. Emergency responders were called, but her injuries were not survivable. Estella Morrow was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators reviewed the footage and examined the property. They found no fault with any external party. Estella had purchased the tiger legally under a private ownership arrangement and had housed it in a specially modified enclosure on her property. Estella had raised the tiger from a cub and spent years believing that the bond they had built meant something the animal could choose to honor. Tigers do not make that calculation. Estella's story was built on an income stream that depended on proximity to danger. The next case has nothing to do with money or fame. It was baffling to me. It is about a man whose obsession started as a childhood fascination and never once let go of it. It was October 13th, 2016 in Centralia, Washington, and the house looked completely normal from the outside when friends arrived the following morning. Kian Evander was 34 years old and had been fascinated by snakes since he was a child. While other kids collected sports cards or spent their allowance on video games, Kian spent his reading about reptiles and watching every documentary he could find about large constrictors. The interest never faded. As an adult with a steady income, he finally had the means to act on it. Through private contacts, he obtained a young reticulated python. Despite warnings from people around him and local regulations that restricted ownership of animals that size, Kian dismissed all of it. He believed that dedication and hands-on experience were enough to manage any animal safely, regardless of what it was. A childhood fascination that never got interrupted by an adult who said no. I think about how rare that actually is and how much it shaped everything that came after. Over the following decade, the python became the center of his life outside of work. He spent thousands of dollars on its care and built dedicated spaces for it inside his home. Friends who visited were rarely comfortable around it, but Kian always responded the same way, telling them the animal was calm and that he knew its behavior better than anyone else. Unlike most keepers of large constrictors, he allowed the python to move freely through parts of the house while he was home. He found it relaxing to watch it explore the rooms. To him, it was no different from a dog or cat wandering the house in the evening. By the time the python reached adulthood, it measured just over 20 feet in length. Experts had told him more than once that an animal that size could not be safely managed alone. Kian always told them he had raised it from a juvenile, and that trust had been built over years. He continued handling it regularly and continued letting it move freely through the house without a second handler present. One evening, after spending time with the snake, Kian settled into his bedroom while the python was still loose in the house. Then, while he was already asleep, the snake coiled around him before he was fully alert enough to respond to it. Once a reticulated python of that size establishes multiple loops around a person's torso, the situation changes completely. Each time the person exhales, the coils tighten slightly to fill the space. Then his chest cavity lost its ability to expand fully on the next inhale. Breathing became shallow and then labored and then stopped producing enough oxygen to maintain consciousness. A person alone in that situation cannot generate the force needed to remove even a single established coil, let alone multiple loops from an animal weighing well over 150 pounds. Kian lost consciousness. The following day, friends who had been calling his phone without an answer went to the house to check on him. They found him unresponsive in his bedroom with the python still present. Emergency services were contacted immediately, but there was nothing to be done. Kian Evander was pronounced dead at the scene. He was asleep when it happened. That detail makes this one feels different from almost every other case I have covered. Investigators examined the room and reviewed what they could piece together from the physical evidence. They found no indication that the python had attempted to consume him. The death was ruled accidental constriction involving a large snake that had been allowed unsupervised access to the living space. Trained animal control personnel removed the python from the property afterward. Kian had spent a decade building what he believed was a relationship with the animal. He had fed it, cared for it, and handled it more times than he could count. None of that changed what the snake was or what it was capable of on an evening when no one else was there. What is coming next is about a man who was wide awake, sitting right next to the animal, when everything changed in seconds. It was March 22nd, 2014. On a private animal ranch near Lake Okeechobee, Florida, and the property was quiet the way it usually was on a weekday afternoon. Jorik Caius was 47 years old and had spent the better part of his adult life building the ranch from open land into something people drove from nearby towns to visit. He owned antelope, exotic birds, and several large animals across the property. But the animal that drew the most attention and the one Jorik spoke about most was a hippopotamus named Titan. He had acquired Titan when the animal was still young enough to be handled without much difficulty and had raised him through every stage of growth. By the time Titan reached adulthood, he weighed somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds. Jorik had never adjusted the way he thought about him. He fed Titan by hand, walked beside him along the water's edge, posed for photographs with him, and regularly told visitors that the hippo was like a son to him. When wildlife experts warned him that the relationship carried serious risk, he dismissed it the same way every time. He believed the years of care he had put into raising Titan had produced something that the standard warnings did not account for. There had been signs that complicated that belief. Calling an animal that size a son tells me everything about how far the line had blurred for Jorik. That language was not casual. It was how he genuinely saw the relationship. Several months before the incident, a visitor and his young grandson wandered too close to Titan while exploring part of the ranch. The hippo charged at them without warning and forced both of them to climb a nearby tree while ranch workers rushed to intervene. Jorik described it afterward as a misunderstanding. Not long after that, Titan pushed through a damaged section of fencing and wandered onto a neighboring golf course, sending golfers running before workers guided him back to the property. Farmers nearby had also reported finding livestock injured or dead close to the ranch boundary, damage they attributed to the hippo. Whether every report was accurate or not, the pattern was visible to everyone around Jorik. He did not change anything. I think at this point he should have considered not keeping, but the hippo stayed anyway. On the afternoon of March 22nd, he went down to the lakeside area of the ranch where Titan spent most of his time. It was a routine he had followed more times than he could count, and nothing about the day appeared different from any other. He was still sitting close to the water, playing with Titan. Then it moved without warning from the water's edge. The initial charge covered the distance between them in seconds. The hippo's jaw came down on Jurek's lower torso, and the force of the bite was immediate and catastrophic. The impact drove him to the ground, and the animal followed through with a second strike before he could move. He had no realistic chance of getting clear once Titan was on him. Hours later, family members noticed he had not returned to the house, and ranch workers began searching the property. They found Jurek near the shoreline, and emergency services were called immediately. He was found without signs of life, and responders were unable to revive him. The coroner attributed his death to injuries sustained during an encounter with Titan. Wildlife specialists who reviewed the case noted that the behavioral pattern leading up to the incident had been consistent with a hippo reasserting territorial boundaries around its water source. Titan had never stopped being a hippopotamus. Jurek had simply never allowed himself to accept what that meant. But imagine being attacked on a special day by your own pet. The next one I found happened just like that. It was May 18th, 2020 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and the birthday party had been Renata's idea from the start. Renata Alvarez was 38 years old and ran a small lifestyle blog from home, and she lived on a small property outside the city with her daughter and an animal. Most people in her life had spent years telling her to give up. Years earlier, she had agreed to take in an orphan chimpanzee that had been separated from its mother under the understanding that the arrangement would be temporary. It never became temporary. The months stretched into years, and somewhere along the way, Renata stopped thinking of him as a wild animal she was housing and started thinking of him as family. In the early years, that feeling made a certain kind of sense. The chimp followed her around the house, played with toys, learned the daily routine, and depended on her for everything. She fed him, nursed him when he was sick, and spent more time with him than she did with most people. He sat at the dinner table, wore clothes, rode in the car, and greeted visitors without incident. Every year that passed without a serious problem made the warnings from friends and relatives easier to dismiss. An arrangement that was supposed to be temporary, turning into years of treating a wild primate like a member of the family. I understand how that happened slowly. I just cannot understand how what came next couldn't be stopped. By the time her daughter turned 7, bringing the chimp to the birthday party felt completely normal to her. He had been around noise and people before without incident, and she saw no reason to treat this differently. He arrived without a harness. The room was crowded and loud, the way children's parties always are. Kids ran between tables, adults talked over each other, music played from a speaker near the wall, and a clown moved through the room entertaining the guests. Renata circulated through the space, greeting family and helping organize the celebration, while the chimp stayed near her. Then she sounded an air horn to get the occasion started. The blast lasted less than a second. He bit into her right hand first, crushing several bones before releasing and lunging again. He seized her forearm and inflicted severe wounds as she tried to pull away. The movement appeared to escalate the attack. He struck her repeatedly, grabbed at her face and scalp, and continued biting and pulling with a strength few people in the room could comprehend. By the time several adults attempted to intervene, Renata had suffered extensive injuries to her hands, arms, face, and upper body. The lacerations were severe, and significant blood loss occurred within minutes. Panic moved through the room instantly. Parents grabbed children and ran. Several people locked themselves in upstairs bedrooms. Others pulled kids into bathrooms and barricaded the doors while calling emergency services from inside. First responders arrived within minutes and found Renata suffering from catastrophic traumatic injuries and severe blood loss. She was transported to a nearby hospital where doctors attempted emergency surgery and massive transfusion measures, but her condition continued to deteriorate. Renata died shortly afterward from complications of her injuries. I genuinely wonder how traumatized those children will be after that incident. Wildlife authorities secured the chimpanzee and investigated the incident. Officials concluded that years of human contact had not removed the instincts of a mature wild animal, and that the air horn had triggered a threat response the animal had no learned behavior to suppress. Because the chimpanzee had caused a fatal attack, it was euthanized. Renata was buried quietly with few friends in attendance. That party left lasting damage on every family who attended. The next case is much quieter. A woman alone on her property with an animal she had cared for since it was a cub. It was 11th May 2021 in rural Pennsylvania. The morning was cool and quiet on a rural property outside a small town where a large bear enclosure sat behind a fenced area. Clover Tansey was 53 years old and lived alone on a property outside a small town. Years earlier, a small wildlife attraction near her town had closed after years of financial trouble. Most of the animals were transferred to larger zoos and sanctuaries, but one young black bear proved difficult to place. Clover had volunteered at the attraction for years and had helped care for the bear since it was a cub. When no immediate home could be found, she agreed to look after it temporarily. Temporary became permanent. After obtaining the permits required to keep the animal, Clover built a large enclosure on her property and continued caring for the bear. She fed it every day, monitored its health, and spent years around it. The bear grew from a playful cub into a powerful adult weighing roughly 350 pounds. But its behavior around her rarely changed. It recognized her voice, accepted food from her hand, and had never seriously injured anyone. As the years passed, familiarity replaced caution. Clover knew the warnings about the bears, but experience made them feel distant. To her, it was not a dangerous predator. It was simply her bear. Friends occasionally questioned whether it was safe to spend so much time around such a large animal. Clover always pointed to the years they had spent together without serious problems. She believed she understood the bear's behavior and trusted it far more than most people would have. Black bears can weigh up to 380 pounds and possess incredible strength. Despite their size, they can move at speeds up to 30 miles per hour. A bear's predatory instincts remain intact regardless of how long they have lived near humans. Familiarity with a person does not eliminate a bear's capacity to attack suddenly and with devastating force. One morning, Clover entered the enclosure to perform routine cleaning. It was a task she had done countless times before. Normally, she would move the bear into a secondary holding area before entering the main enclosure. Because she had gotten used to him, she skipped that step that morning. Nothing else seemed unusual. She skipped the one safety step she always followed. I understand how less dangers can cause lack of fear, but actually doesn't stop what unfolded next. At some point during the cleaning, the bear suddenly attacked. The bear moved with sudden speed and struck Clover hard, knocking her to the ground. She screamed as it attacked her repeatedly, using its powerful paws and jaws. She tried to protect herself but could not escape the animal's strength. The attack lasted only seconds, but the injuries were catastrophic. Clover's body went still beneath the bear's weight. A neighbor who heard the commotion called emergency services. First responders arrived quickly, but Clover had suffered critical injuries. Despite their efforts, she died before she could be transported to a hospital. Responding officers arrived to find the bear still inside the enclosure. Because it remained a potential threat to emergency personnel and others nearby, the animal was shot and killed at the scene. She was buried peacefully behind her house with neighbors and loved ones in attendance. The last case I'm covering today is about a man whose downfall came down to one repair he kept putting off. It was August 16, 2022, on a rural property outside Springfield, Missouri. Aslan Malachi was 46 years old and worked as a building contractor. Most days were spent managing projects, meeting clients, and traveling between construction sites. Several years earlier, though, a vacation had changed the direction of his life completely. During a trip to Africa, Aslan visited a wildlife facility and became fascinated by lions. He spent hours watching them and talking with the handlers there. The experience stayed with him long after he flew home. What started as admiration slowly grew into something closer to an obsession. A few years later, he legally acquired a young male lion and brought it back to his property. The lion quickly became the center of his life. At first, the animal was small enough to handle easily. Aslan spent hours feeding it and caring for it and showing pictures of it to anyone who would look. As the lion grew, he spent thousands of dollars building a large enclosure behind the house designed to keep the animal secure while still giving it room to move. The lion grew into roughly 400 pounds of muscle and instinct that never fully left him, no matter how tame he seemed. A single vacation reshaping the entire direction of someone's life. I think about how often that happens with a brief encounter that turns into a years-long obsession nobody saw coming. Many people questioned whether keeping an animal like that was a good idea. Aslan always gave the same answer. He had raised the lion himself. The animal recognized his voice and took food from his hand and had never seriously threatened him. Years passed without incident, and that history made Aslan more and more confident. To him, the lion was not just an exotic pet. It was something closer to family, something he believed he understood better than anyone else could. As the years went by, the enclosure began showing its age. Rain and changing temperatures and rust slowly wore down parts of the structure. One of the gate latches became loose. Aslan noticed it and told himself he would fix it soon, but other jobs kept getting in the way. Every time he looked at it, he convinced himself it would hold a little longer. I think about how many small repairs sit on a list for months because nothing bad has happened yet. He just needed to fix it. On the 16th of August, Aslan took the day off and stayed home. He spent the morning relaxing around the house while the lion stayed inside its enclosure out back. At some point that afternoon, the weakened latch finally gave out. The gate shifted open, just enough for the lion to push through it. Once outside the enclosure, the animal wandered across the property and eventually made its way to the house itself. Inside, Aslan had no idea anything was wrong. He was alone that day. A short while later, he stepped out of the bathroom and walked into the hallway, and that was when he saw the lion standing less than 10 feet away inside his own house, blocking the path to the front door. For a moment, neither of them moved, and in that silence, Aslan made the mistake of locking eyes with it before slowly stepping backward toward the bedroom. The lion's ears flattened against its skull, and its weight shifted low onto its front legs, and then it came at him in a single explosive burst, covering the distance in under 2 seconds. Lions can sprint at roughly 50 miles per hour over short distances despite their enormous size. It hit him chest first with the full weight of its body, slamming him backward into the wall before he even got a hand up, and the impact alone was enough to knock him to the floor. Once he was down, the lion clamped its jaw around his throat and shoulder and did not let go. And the bite from an animal that size carries enough force to crush bone and sever major blood vessels almost instantly. He had no door to shut and no weapon within reach, and nothing in the house built to stop 400 pounds of muscle once it decided to commit. Then he became unconscious. He walked out of his own bathroom into a hallway that suddenly held a 400-pound predator. There was no version of that hallway he could have prepared for. Hours later, his colleagues grew concerned when they could not reach him. Repeated calls went unanswered, which was unusual for him. Eventually, someone asked authorities to perform a welfare check. When officers arrived, they found the damaged enclosure gate and realized the lion was no longer secured. Emergency services were called immediately. Inside the house, responders found Aslan with fatal injuries. Because the lion was still loose on the property and posed a danger to emergency workers and nearby residents, authorities made the decision to shoot and kill the animal. Investigators later concluded that the tragedy began with a maintenance problem that had simply been left unrepaired. The lion had not escaped through some complicated failure or freak event. One weakened latch had finally given way and let one of the world's largest predators walk straight into a house.